Uhuru, comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akile Anai, Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. These studies are so important, and we encourage you right now to invite your friends and your family to it. This week, Chairman Omali Yeshitela will continue reading from his most recent work, Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. We're picking back up in Chapter 4, The Deepening Crisis of Imperialism, starting on page 132. This lesson we'll be receiving today will help us understand what's happening in the world, why it's happening, and gives us a clear direction on what we need to do. To understand the crisis of this social system is to be reassured that our victory is possible. Following the study, we will open it up for our live viewers to ask questions. And it is now my honor to introduce our leadership, the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African Revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Comrade Sister Akile. I want to welcome everybody who is coming to attend this study on today. And I really want to extend a statement of appreciation and a profound respect for the members of our incredible party. As you know, while these studies have been opened up to everyone who would participate in them, this was begun as a means by which we would contribute political education to the rapid growth of the numbers of people who were coming into our party, and to help people grow their capacity to deal with providing leadership as cadre during normal times for sure, but certainly during this tumultuous era that we are going through. So I want to really say that I understand the significance of all the work that the party members, and by this I also include the constituent organizations, all of the constituent organizations that part of the Uhuru movement. That would include, you know, the NPDUM and other mass organizations that are there. That would include the forces who are doing this incredible work on the ground with the Black Power Blueprint. And that would include the forces of APDEP that's extending the African internationalist presence to various parts of the world and throughout the United States, recruiting people with specialized skills, allowing it for the first time in a very, very long time for these skills to be a service to Africa, to the African Revolution. I include, you know, obviously the APEDF, African People's Education Defense Fund, the African People's Solidarity Committee, Uhuru Solidarity Movement, etc. I know this is incredibly significant and powerful work that you do. And it's heroic. I characterize it as heroic because for the longest period of time, we've had to swim upstream. There have been so many people within the last 6 or 7 years in particular who have been pushed into political motion. And most of them have been pushed into political motion without any kind of ideological mooring. They've not been tethered to any kind of ideological principles or anything like that. They've not had a connection to the history of our struggle, and in many instances have been ignorant of any struggle or movement. The world began at the moment they achieved a certain level of consciousness. And as is usually the case, Africans become aware of being Black because the ideological offensive against African people has, for the longest period of time, certainly since almost the advent of the whole capitalist system, revolved around the characterization of blackness, of being black, and how that has been demonized. And so the value of quote unquote blackness has been a kind of response to this ideological assault on our people that was something that was created to provide the basis, part of the superstructure, created the basis for the colonization of African people, and with that, the growth of the whole capitalist world. I know that many instances that's been it. And so a lot of Africans have come into, through political life, just determined to hold up blackness and the significance of blackness and what Black people have done, and all of that has been important, but it's not been enough. And some people have been locked into this place and have come up with almost mirror images of the capitalist and colonial philosophy by attributing to blackness, this mysterious blackness, some of the same characteristics that have been attributed to whiteness, that there's some biological thing that made whiteness significant and powerful, and so we've done the same thing. There's been this process of human development. We have been told that gave whiteness and white people a certain beneficial presence in the world, and left the rest of us in sort of like in the dust of history. And so we've often imitated them and showing how being Black really is the most important thing in the world. So that's sort of been like a natural kind of phenomenon, and of African people coming to consciousness first. But what the party has done is really develop a science of understanding our situation. We have used, in fact, a scientific process that the Marxists have referred to, Marx himself rather referred to as historical materialism, which is a way that we can investigate and analyze society and how society is moving. And we use this, and we actually developed a theory called African internationalism, which is so important. And it informs everything that we do, which is not to say we don't make mistakes and do wrong things, but there is an ideological foundation that guides us and that gives us the opportunity to measure whether or not we are correct or incorrect, because the theory tells us where the hell it is that we're going. It tells us where we are in the world, and it tells us where it is that we're going. We make a prediction of the success of African revolution. There's no doubt about in our minds of whether or not we'll be successful or not. We know we're going to be successful, but I know that many of you comrades who've come into the work had to go against the stream. You had to swim against the stream to actually join a party who was dead certain about where it is we were going, who had so much confidence in the fact that the African masses would rise up again. This was before what we've seen in Ferguson and what we've seen coming out of May 25th murder of George Floyd. Everything that we've done has made a prediction that the masses of African people would thrust ourselves back into political life, and and that the struggle will be victorious. And so you had to go against a lot of doubt to do that and to do the work that you've done. But we've been building impressive organizations, and I think that's extremely important. And we've been guided by theory. That's extremely important. And because we've been guided by theory, we have been less inclined to be motivated by what is happening at the moment, by particular kinds of incidents. And we have been less vulnerable to charlatans and hustlers and opportunists who pop up, and many of whom have come to understand the growing popularity logic of African internationalist theory and what it is that we do. And they become revisionists, and they will steal this or that and tweak this word and that word in an attempt to divert the working class and the African masses and other people away from revolutionary conclusions that is represented by the party. So I know that's been problematic for many forces, and that you've gone and continued to build, and I think that's incredible. And just recently, we're hearing about the growing presence of the party in various places around the world. I want to, in even having this discussion, beginning this discussion, I want to send out, also a shout to Comrade Masamela in San Diego, who has, as a member of our party, our movement has increasingly moved to assume different kinds of leadership responsibility that's characteristic of cadre, which is what we're building, because the objective is to have an organization of organizers, of revolutionary politicians, so to speak, who have the ability of pulling other forces into our orbit and creating mass movements and organizations. And that's good work that's happening in that area. Much of it happening under the leadership of Comrade Muambi in San Diego, and of course the regional leadership of Comrade Bakri Olatunji. And it's impressive. And I just want to say that recently, we've just been watching how Comrade Masamela has been, bringing in new forces, and that's been impressive. I want to send a shout out to Comrade Diop Olukbala also. Comrade Diop has, suffered a very serious, dramatic kind of injury, but he's always been there, always been trying to fight, as well as he's known how to fight, to uphold African internationalist principles, and sometimes more effective than other times. And sometimes because sometimes he has, just shown a certain, heroic features, which is not always enough. As Comrade Diop knows, we've, struggled to help him to understand, but I appreciate the fact that even under some of the most serious contradictions for himself in terms of health and things like that, he's tried to uphold African internationalist principles. I want to appreciate also the comrades, other comrades, specifically in the Southern California area, who represent the Mexican National Liberation Movement, comrades with whom we've held relationship more than 30 some odd years, and talking specifically about Unión de Barrio. The founder of that organization, Ernesto Bustillo, was not just a comrade, but a deep personal friend. And I say it in that fashion because I know we recognize the significance of comrades and compañeros on the one hand, but it's really good when you can really like a comrade, because sometimes we recognize, and most times we recognize, that comrades are really significant relationships, sometimes greater than family and things like that, because we on the same historical mission, and we recognize it and collude with each other to bring success to this mission and this struggle against colonial capitalism, to destroy a social system that oppresses and deprives the people of humanity and dignity and all the resources that we need to feed, clothe, and house our people. This is a powerful relationship that comrades would have, and I think that's really important. But also, it's good if you can like a comrade, and that, compañero Comandante Ernesto Bustillo was such a force who introduced us to this relationship with Unión de Barrio. So I say this in tremendous respect and memory for that comrade, and for respect for Unión de Barrio and the relationship that we have as sister organizations. So I wanted to just open up saying that. So we'll be continuing the discussion that we began last Sunday, talking about the deepening crisis of imperialism. This is taken from the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And this is, further evidence of the significance of our party, because we don't just do stuff, as I mentioned earlier. We do things based on a prediction that we've made through a theory of African internationalism. Of course, we talk about African internationalism, we're talking about recognizing that the existing social system on the planet Earth, the existing capitalist system on the planet Earth owes its presence to the captivity, enslavement of African people, which was critical to the colonial project that upon which the whole capitalist system rests. That's it. That's the foundation. And recognizing that, whatever's happening at this moment, we know what brought this thing into being, and therefore we know what can take it off the planet and take it out of existence. And so we are African internationalists, and we are firm African internationalists. We recognize the significance of theory. We recognize the significance of organization. And as a party, we are determined not to allow anybody, to push us out of this arena of organization, destroy, undermine the party as an organization, and the other organizational work that we do, which is not necessarily explicitly the party, but organization. And then the question of theory, to have that watered down and beaten down and revised and sometimes used against the revolution, used against the people. We are conscious of that. You see it, I see it all the time. And sometimes, forces who are close to us in our midst and things like that, who have an opportunity, should they so desire, to end their little small circle kinds of activity, to end, or certainly, if not end, to subsume, to make subservient to revolutionary organization of the party. They have these opportunities to do that, but they have chosen something else as opportunists, as forces who would derail the revolutionary project. So I appreciate all the work that you're doing. And I just want to say, we're going back to the deepening crisis of imperialism. And we've talked about how to understand this phenomenon of Donald Trump that has excited so many people, rightfully so, within the United States and around the world. His actions, the fact that his policies and politics go against tradition that most of us are familiar with, and that has been responsible for defining the trajectory of imperialist white power over the last 70 or so years, and that it has now been equated with civilization. So he goes against what is recognized as civilized behavior, civilized activity, etc. And people are struggling with that to the point that many Africans are unable to see the social system itself, because this guy, this man, Donald Trump, has now come to epitomize in the minds of many what is wrong with the system. And so we want to bring clarity to that. And that's part of what we talk about when we started this discussion on last Sunday, that Trump is a phenomenon and significant. And what he says sounds strange in part because he's disrupting the historical trajectory. He is playing a role in disrupting the historical trajectory over the last 70 years of how the whole capitalist system under what they call Western capitalism or Western imperialism, about which we're talking about the white world. For the most part, for the most part, not exclusively, but for the most part, Western Europe is characterized as, but we would include, like Canada, we would include the US, we would include Australia, New Zealand, all of this as a part of this Western world. And so, which has its foundation, the colonization, the economic structures, political structures that came into being and have been modified since that time through slavery and colonialism. It's the process through which the white world has become rich, and the whole world economy relies on for its success. That's the process that we are talking about, and Trump has come in at a time. This is because we said in the last Sunday's meeting, when we began this process of discussion, that at different times in history, the Europeans have come together to actually sit down and redivide the world and say what parts of the world each of them will be able to dominate in relationship with each other, with each other. To keep the whole successful, they've carved up parts of the world. They've reinvented themselves at different times in terms of the so-called countries that they exist, and even redefine what is supposed to be nations among themselves. This is what they've done over a period of time. And at the end of the Second Imperialist World War, which was incredibly devastating, a devastation that included, but is not often talked about, the dropping of the only atomic bombs in history up to now in terms of warfare against the Japanese, killing more than 100, perhaps as many as totally as many as 250,000 civilians. This is, they talk about terrorists, you know, they talk about these amateurs who walk into a place maybe with a bomb strapped to their waist. They drop atomic bombs that I think in Hiroshima killed something like 100,000 people, civilians. These were not military force, these were civilians that they killed, etc. So so we have this whole, and the Atlantics is what this group has been called. And part of what this group, part of what has created the trajectory of this grouping, the Western world, if you will, has been a desire to minimize or to control the contradictions that exist among these white powers as they compete and contend with each other to continue to steal the resources of the peoples of the world, of Africa, Asia, the Americas, and what have you. Because the whole economic and political social system rests upon that relationship, upon the white world, what Europe and the Europeans have been able to extract by force of arms from the colonized peoples of the world. And so this has been a part of the dynamics, the struggles of the colonized people that, and the struggles among the European powers to say what they are going to get from the resources of oppressed and colonized people that's thrust them into competition, battle with each other, is coming out of, and where a tremendous amount of death and destruction came out of the Second Imperialist World War. Part of what they needed to do was to prevent that from happening again. They had tried to do this after the First Imperialist World War, that was called World War I, with the so-called League of Nations. And the League of Nations were the predecessor to the United Nations. And so this was to be like a parliamentary device through which the white world could unite on how to control the rest of us, the rest of the world, and can do so without violence and warfare among themselves. That's why there's so much talk about peace with the United Nations, and the same thing was true with the League of Nations. This was peace among those predators who would manage the world and do it in a fashion that made it unnecessary for them to have to fight among themselves in order to do it. You know, there's whole stuff that's being talked about, the power and significance of the United Nations and how wonderful it is, and somebody violated this law and that law was imposed, created by the United Nations. But most of the international law was created while most of the world was enslaved by white people. So we didn't have much of a say to do what international law looked like. And in fact, it was what they were doing in 1919 or so, subsequent to the First Imperialist World War. They were talking about how they were going to redivide Africa. And this was the League of Nations that propelled, had Garvey, incited Garvey to say, when you're talking about carving up Africa, Africa for Africans at home and abroad. And of course, in more recent times, we still see the struggle unfolding. And we talked about how elections in these so-called democratic spaces like the United States, England, and even farces like the illegitimate parasitic settler, white nationalist settler state of Israel, places even under the apartheid regime of South Africa, they were characterized as democratic because they had these elections. And we talked about how the elections are simply function as a means by which the sectors, contending sectors of the colonial capitalist class, these white bosses, for the most part, but it's been system that they've extended to other parts of the world, how they are nothing but nonviolent contests. They represent nothing except nonviolent contests between different sectors, contending sectors of the ruling class for control of the state. And the state is this bureaucracy, this consolidation of coercion and violence in the form that's most widely expressed as police, as armies, militaries, as courts and jails and prisons, and also as secret service entities that they've created. Everything from your local intelligence, police intelligence organization to the National Geospatial Intelligence Organization that they pushing forward very hard to create a new space for right there in St. Louis in the heart of the African community. So this is the state. And in the last election that happened in 2016, what happened was you had all of these forces, the bourgeoisie, the white rulers are split. And they're split in part because of the contest that they are faced with oppressed peoples around the world taking back or fighting to take back their resources, and the emergence of a force like China and the reemergence of Russia as a contending force, which means that there's less pie to share among these thieves. And because of that, you have almost an every white man for himself kind of situation that expresses itself locally and internationally. So there's this split, there's this division within the white rulers, so that they unite on the need to keep us oppressed so they can continue to steal everything that we've got. And so that we would be in a state of perpetual bondage that feeds them at our expense. They unite with that. They don't want that destroyed. They don't want that disrupted. But the thing is that they have concluded that this is a process that should actually continue to exist under certain circumstances. So you had the situation where in the last election, 2016, approximately 25 different individual candidates were vying for the nomination of their particular parties, the Democrat and Republican parties, which is a single manifestation of imperialism. Though people call it duopoly and all of this, it's white power. And it presents itself to us and the way that it needs to present itself to us in order to capture our loyalty, because therefore the kind of social system we have, the appearance of consensus among the mass of the people, the need for the ruling class, because it's a minority, a tiny minority of the community of the people, the need to say that there is this mass base that support its policies. They spend billions of dollars to put these characters in front of the people, and they put these policies in front of the people that's spewed out by different persons who call themselves the candidates of this party and the candidate of that party, and the candidates of the bourgeoisie. So one thing that we always know in these elections, no matter what individual ends up being successful, the bourgeoisie always wins. The bourgeoisie, we say, who's gonna win the election? White power. Who's gonna win the election? Colonial capitalism gonna win the election. And the capitalist colonialist entity also functions then as an arm of the state. It moderates this peace between sectors of the ruling class who are contending with each other for control of the state and the resources of the peoples of the world. Anyway, that's what we talked about last time. And what Trump has done is he entered the fray as an independent force who was not tied to either of the sectors of the bourgeoisie or specific representatives of the bourgeoisie that you found who were contesting for that election. He had enough money and he had enough presence through being this reality television person. He had enough money and he had enough presence. He had enough egotistical flair, if you will, to command an audience that did not require from the start to get the same kind of support and money that he got, that the other candidates had to get from other sectors of the bourgeoisie. In fact, the bourgeois media helped him because they treated him like a joke, and he didn't have to spend money on advertisement or anything. Anything he said, they printed it. He got free press all the time, up and down the line. And not because they supported him, because they didn't think it was a way in hell that he could ever become the president of the United States. And he did become the president of the United States. But he didn't resolve the fundamental question of who, of being able to control the state itself. That's the thing that these elections are supposed to result in. And they do it more or less successfully at different times. And this time, Trump came into power, and he did not come in as he called himself a Republican, but he was not attached to any sector of the bourgeoisie, the Republicans or the Democrats or anything like that. And so what he came in attacking the system itself as it's run. And that grew him popularity among a certain sector of the white world. In the same way, Bernie Sanders gained popularity with a certain sector of the white world, because the masses of people were disgusted with the corruption, with the inability of the system to provide for them. So they saw in Sanders this outlier who was challenging him. Remember, Sanders also was not a Democratic proper. He obviously is a Democrat, but he's supposedly independent, democratic, socialist kind of guy. And then Trump was not a Republican proper. He calls himself a Republican, and now increasingly he's got the Republican Party locked into his embrace because he's won the support of so many white people. And so that means that all the other white Republican politicians who hated his guts, who said it over and over again during the election, now find themselves having to suck up to him because he could make a difference in whether or not they will get the support of these white nationalist white people who will vote them in or out of office. And so Trump came into office attacking this Atlanticist group, the grouping that is characterized as Atlanticist. They didn't say this during the elections, but you can even read the bourgeoisie now. You can even look up what the Atlanticist group is. And these are people who got organized, sectors of the bourgeoisie that came together and shaped and molded the trajectory of capitalist imperialism coming after the Second Imperialist War. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, United Nations, things like that, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, even Israel came into existence during this time. The so-called Marshall Plan that repaired the devastated Europe came around this time, I think something like 1948 for that. And all of this was designed first part to corral, to undermine the Soviet Union, the ability of the Soviet Union, the communist movement to induce working masses of people throughout Europe to make revolution. In some instances, the assumption was that this would happen throughout the African and colonized world as well. So to protect their interests as capitalists, as the world custodians of all the wealth of the world, what they did was come up with this process that was going to isolate the Russians, the Soviet Union in the name of fighting against communism, and then they characterized as a Cold War, a war where people were not necessarily shooting at each other, but a Cold War that facilitated this contest where the Soviets and Chinese communists, to a lesser extent, were trying to expand their influence to Africa and other places around the world, and in Europe for the Soviets. So the Marshall Plan was to help to undermine that by injecting a tremendous amount of resources into Western Europe to rebuild Western Europe, to forestall revolutionary struggle from coming to Europe to overthrow capitalism as it was understood by the so-called Marxists and by the capitalists in Europe. So anyway, that's part of what happened. And so Trump assaulted all of that and introduced another kind of trajectory that he tried to make happen revolve around Russia, because Russia has tremendous potential, especially in the arena of petroleum and energy resources, et cetera, but it had been isolated all the time by the rest of the white world. And so Trump and his cronies were going to create a new base of capital by intervening into Russia. That's why much of what you have heard around Trump and all of the people who've gone to jail or close to jail with the Trump administration, or certainly a great sector of them has been tied to Russia. And that's why also the bourgeoisie a sector of the bourgeoisie attacked Russia, and Trump and Russia to forestall the possibility that Trump could invite Russia into the House in a fashion that would make it increasingly possible for Russia to influence what's happening in Germany, what's happening in other parts of unity, to disrupt the entire 70-year-old historical relationship that's existed between the rest of imperial white power and the United States. And Russia has been a critical part. And then, of course, the Russia issue also has been one that served to try to make it impossible for Trump to govern. And so the sector of the bourgeoisie, has claimed that the Russians elected Trump, that the Russians are responsible for, that anything that's happening today, where if Africans complain about what's happening to us in this country, it's the Russians who are doing it. If Africans challenge Mexicans challenge what's happening, it's the Russians who are responsible for it. The social networks, social media, etc. Russia intervention is what's the basis of any complaint that we've got against the United States. That's coming from a certain sector of the bourgeoisie, and they've made it damn near impossible for Trump to consolidate this Russia relationship he was trying to have with Russia. So anyway, I'm going to start on page 32. I've talked enough, and I'm going to be expeditious because I've used a considerable amount of time with that. Just saying a little bit about what we've already talked about. So let's move forward. So I'm on page 132. And again, this is from the Deepening Crisis of Imperialism, chapter 4. From Vanguard, the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. This is different from just some book that's going to express my opinions about this or that, or it's a book that is to inform the activity of a political party, a political organization that's growing around the world. Just recently, I'm hearing that we are moving in Gabon, we're moving in Uganda. We know we've got incredible work that's happening under the leadership of Comrade Louise Kinshasa, who's the Secretary General of the African Socialist International, and Comrade Tafari Mugeri, who is active not only in building the party and having party organization in what they call South Africa, Azania, but also is the Secretary General, also is the directive organization for all the work that's happening on the continent of Africa. We're growing in the Caribbean area as well, so that meetings happening within this last week of comrades from the Caribbean who are coming into the party. This is a good sign. This is finally the African revolution is achieving the kind of gravity and stature among African people that's incredibly important if we're going to be free. And this is different from what the charlatans and opportunists and revisionists would do. The revisionists and the opportunists would take people off the point. But we recognized a long time ago that the African revolution has run into its limitations when we just try to fight it within these borders that white power has created for us, whether that borders in Texas, or whether that border is what we call Haiti, or whether that border is what borders what we call Jamaica or Uganda or any other entity like that. That they gotta go, and the African revolution has to be an international revolution, so that every place we struggle in, from every place, from every front, the revolution has a strategic character all the time, And that's driving us toward the conclusion of the total liberation and unification of Africa and African people worldwide. So on page 132, we say crisis abounds. The European Union, once perceived by some as a big economy competitor of the US, is currently in disarray. The departure of England from the group and others threatening to do the same compounds the implications of the unremitting economic and political crisis of Greece, the threat to the integrity of Spain's presumed national identity, and the Eurosceptic government that has come to power in Italy. War continues to undermine the stability of the Middle East. Yemen, an ally of Iran, strategically located at the mouth of the Red Sea shipping lane, has endured ruthless slaughter and starvation of its population by a US-Israel supported war by Saudi Arabia. The voluntary self-censorship of the US and European media serves as a function of this war. So you don't know about that war too much because this media that believes so much in free speech is voluntarily censoring itself. So it doesn't report on Yemen, it doesn't report on the ongoing wars happening in Africa right now under the auspices of the United States government. Of course, France has been there for a long time now. The US is engaged in several countries, maybe 100 or so countries. The United States is engaged in ongoing warfare on the continent of Africa right now. The US war that destroyed the Iraqi government of Saddam Hussein has resulted in the growing influence of Iran in that region. The US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia have combined to combat Iran in a variety of ways that include the war against Yemen and the economic quarantine of Iran. And we can say much more has happened since this was written for the political report of 2018. Right now, Iran there have been bombings by the United States government in Israel of structures and important scientific institutions in Iran. After 5 years, the US initiated war against Syria that stemmed from the counterinsurgent intent to overthrow the regime of Bashar al-Assad continues to be fraught with a major potential for imperialist world war. Under Trump, the US and Israel have attacked Syria to target Syrian allied Iranian troops under Trump, the US and Israel have attacked Syria to target Syrian allied Iranian troops, also risking military confrontation with Russian troops deployed in Syria. Contributing to the crisis of imperialism is the fact that China has initiated a major economic project designed to further challenge the Atlanticist arrangement. The $100 billion Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, created by the Xi Jinping administration, already has commitments from at least 21 Asian countries. That was in 2018. It's grown exponentially since then. Australia, Indonesia, and South Korea were noticeably absent from the deal after severe pressure from the United States, because this Iranian infrastructure investment bank is a challenge, a direct, immediate challenge to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, both of which are controlled by the United States government. Many of the members of the AIIB are countries of the Chinese-led Belt and Road Initiative. These major Chinese economic projects that necessarily encroach on the heretofore domination of the world by Euro-American capital contribute to the overall crisis of imperialism. It's really important to understand this, see, because we see what the US government is doing in Portland, how the federal troops go in and they are doing this and that, and there's a frantic response to that. And there should be a major response to it, but it shouldn't be alarmist. And it shouldn't be frightening, because what you see is a situation where the society is fracturing based on the deep and profound contradictions that we are talking about now. It's not just Portland, it's a major contradiction that the system is undergoing. And Portland and what the US is having to do to try to control the situation is not just the erratic behavior of Trump. It's not only because that Trump is doing everything he can to be reelected, but it's also something that's driving this situation, and that is the crisis of a whole social system and various factors involved in that. If you know this, then even if you're having to struggle with growing repression and stuff like that, you know that you're not on your hand is not weak. They have a weak hand. And it tells us something about the potential and strength. If we are organized and consolidated ideologically, our theory is sound, and we can move and we can win, and we should move and win, because what we are doing is contributing consciousness to the spontaneous activity of the peoples of the world who are trying to change this relationship that they have with imperial white power. At the same time, other countries find themselves looking for options outside the Atlanticist sphere of control. Even the ongoing scandal in South Africa politics involving former president and African National Congress ANC leader Jacob Zuma revolves around charges of corruption conveniently leveled at Zuma by equally corrupt officials opposed to his apparent coziness with Indian and possibly Chinese capital. In Africa, at least one government has been overthrown by France because of an attempt to initiate a new deal with China that would free Ivory Coast from the clutches of historical French colonialism. It's important because there's a crisis that's deepening in Ivory Coast right now. And it cannot be understood by just watching that crisis in isolation from all the other things that we're talking about now, because everything in Africa is connected to the existing world economy that's currently controlled by colonial capitalists, and most of these are from the colonizers of the past, though China and other forces are intervening in that situation, but that's what we're looking at. So we say, Hugo Chavez of Venezuela and Muammar Gaddafi of Libya are two of the leaders who were undermined and or killed because of attempts made to escape domination of the US military-backed dollar, still the leading world currency. Imperialism continues to exist, and it is the leading world currency, but it's in a state of trouble right now. The value of the dollar is going down, and even though that can offer critical contradiction, it is a contradiction. On the one hand, the other hand, you may see it may result in growing economic activity from the international world, because the lower value of the dollar could possibly result in much more trade with the United States, because the people will get a deal because of the value of the dollar is no longer the same. So they'll be able to get stuff for less. But the problem is, even Europe is experiencing a recession right now that's tied to the so-called pandemic, and also tied to this whole overall crisis of imperialism that's making itself manifest in Africa, Asia, and other places around the world. So there's no telling how this thing is going to come out. Imperialism continues to exist. Colonial capitalism continues to be the dominant social system on earth. However, there is an uneasy equilibrium where the struggle of the oppressed and colonized peoples of the world calls into question everything that shaped the political and economic features of the world. This crisis has reached its tipping point. The crisis of imperialism is characterized by extraordinary volatility that is also reflected in the politics and consciousness of the peoples of the world. The crisis of imperialism is also reflected in extraordinary the crisis of imperialism is characterized by extraordinary volatility that is also reflected, this volatility, in the consciousness of the peoples of the world. And people are trying to understand what the hell is happening. What are we looking at when we see the response to the George Floyd and all these other things? This is a part of overall crisis, and this volatility. Just think about this. We live in a world today where the greatest power on political and military power on earth has been for more than 25 years unable to conquer a hungry people in Afghanistan, a tiny country where people barely have enough bread to feed their children. And this is definitely something that attacks the mystique of the all-powerful United States. And whether it is intended that way, whether it's being taught or not, it affects the consciousness of the subject peoples of the world, including Black people in the Fifth Ward of Houston, Texas. That is to say, people growing up now seeing that this great white man, this powerful country, is incapable of defeating people of Afghanistan, and now is trying to beg a way to get to the negotiating table so they can get the hell out of there in some face-saving way. So that affects the consciousness. It's this serious volatility is reflected in the politics and consciousness of the peoples of the world. Europeans, and especially Americans, are experiencing distress. The growing alcoholism, drug addiction, suicide, mass killings, and a host of social affliction and disease of despair have caused an unusual spike in the death rate of white people, especially middle-aged white men in the US. And also it's caused white people, millions of them, to be involved in demonstrations throughout this country subsequent to George Floyd. There's a whole change and volatility of the consciousness of the people, because the anchor of white nationalism, the colonial ideological anchor, is under assault now by the resistance and struggles of the peoples of the world. I just mentioned something about Russia a moment ago, and then Comrades commented and said to me that somebody saw this, what they think is a sign. It's a t-shirt mounted, it hasn't been taken out. I was in Moscow and it says, "I love Moscow." And so they were perturbed because they don't support Vladimir Putin, they said. And that says, "I love Moscow." And I recognize, and our party recognizes, that there's a contest going on where the United States government, it's not what a personal feeling for Putin or a personal feeling for Trump, for that matter. There's a contest going on that's challenging the current political and economic configuration of the world. And so that t-shirt is, "I love Moscow," is a slap in the face to all of these attempts to make Moscow the basis of the Russia, the basis of the contradictions that exist in this country. Before Putin was born, before there was a V.I. Lenin, before there was a Joseph Stalin, Black people in America were being lynched and hanged and shot down in the streets, just as they are being lynched and hanged and shot down in the streets today in this country. So the "I love Moscow" t-shirt that I purchased in Moscow was simply my statement, slap in the face to this presumed hegemony that the US has over the world, and the ability to deflect its own responsibility. And the citizens of this country, meaning white people, deflect the responsibility from the role that you play in maintaining the oppression of Africans and other peoples around the world. So we just don't play that, that's all. So it wasn't put there. In fact, I didn't even know people would see it. It's like I said, it's a t-shirt. and my wife is, extraordinarily busy about now. We're locked in the house and what have you much of the time. And so that's just a t-shirt that's been mounted on a bookshelf behind me. On the other hand, this volatility is represented by growing struggles of colonized people, boldly challenging their relationship to imperialist white power. This is happening globally and within the US among Africans in the imperialist center. The imperialists are struggling to find their place during this crisis. All kinds of new possibilities are opening up for our revolution. Central to all our possibilities is the growth of the organization, capacity, and influence of our party, the key resource available to our forcibly dispersed colonized nation. New alliances will also present themselves to our struggle, as the old alliances among the imperialists are dying and or reorganizing themselves. In the past, when certain fissures emerged within the imperialist camp, our movement was able to form important relationships with the governments of Cuba, Algeria, and Congo, Brazzaville, among others. Vietnam and China also played a key support to anti-colonial freedom fighters. Even some bourgeois nationalist governments of of Africa and the Middle East were willing to leverage their power by aiding the struggle of Africans in the US and throughout Africa during an era when the Soviet Union also represented a counterbalance to US power. As the balance of power continues to shift and the crisis deepens, the coming years will bring to light the possibility of new allies and alliances which embrace the African anti-colonial struggle. Whites fear fascism while ignoring everyday terror of colonialism. There are some liberals who would have us engage in an unrelenting fight against fascism that they see in the utterings and actions of Trump. And I say some liberals because there are some Africans. So somehow this fascism thing has come to be a demonstration of how clever and how left and how up to date somebody is. So fascism is either coming, or fascism, or prototypical fascism is here as a consequence of the election of Donald Trump. Before then, that was talked about. McCain was going to represent fascism and may or may not represent fascism, but we'll say more about that. So we say that there are some liberals who will have us engage in an unrelenting fight against fascism that they see in the utterings and actions of Trump. However, we never forget that we are colonized, and democratic colonialism is still colonialism. The fascism feared by whites and liberals look very much like the colonialism Africans have experienced in this country for centuries. Europeans are accustomed to the experience of bourgeois democracy, which hides the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. For colonized people, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie is raw and obvious all the time through the violence of the state and the general white population, as well as the arbitrary denial of the civil and democratic rights of the colonized. What Europeans call fascism is the point when the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie experienced all the time by Africans and other colonized people challenges the veneer of bourgeois democracy enjoyed by white people. The liberals would have us turn our backs on the liberation of our people and the colonized peoples of the world to come to the rescue of liberal democratic colonialism. Like when you talk about, this murder of George Floyd on May 25th was not unique, not unusual. It is common and ordinary, but it wasn't characterized as fascism. The murder of Emmett Till was not characterized as fascism. The terror imposed on African people throughout the South, the murder that happens without any consequence to law enforcement forces killing African people throughout this country, not fascism. The fact that half or more of the people who are in the largest prison gulag on earth today, where more than 2.5 million people are locked up, but 2/3 of them being Africans, being Mexicans and other indigenous people, is not fascism. That's not fascism. So that happens to us all the time. And it's colonialism that we are fighting against. So we say that, again, the liberals would have us turn our backs on the liberation of our people and the colonized peoples of the world to come to the rescue of liberal democratic colonialism. The struggle against fascism serves a sector of the white ruling class and colonial society, but for African people, it only maintains our self-defeating fight to make white people like us and to stop the police from killing and imprisoning us. The struggle against fascism is, in many ways, similar to the fight against racism, in that it is a struggle to find a safe place within colonialism. It is a struggle that protects the colonial capitalist relationship that we have with imperialist white power. You're gonna hear some other posers having this discussion in the near future, I guarantee you. I can even call the names and stuff, who are gonna be talking about this, about fascism, where yesterday they were anti-fascists and come up with popular, what we call popular pop theory, that throws in every popular definition of the problem that people are experiencing and try to have it embraced, surrounded by African internationalist articulations as well. So we say, again, it is a struggle that protects the colonial capitalist relationship that we have with imperialist white power. It is a struggle that unites with one sector of colonial power against another. and it does absolutely nothing to destroy colonialism. This is reminiscent of now deceased activist and poet Amiri Baraka, when he expressed concern in 2008 that African Andor left a refusal to support Obama's election would open the door to fascism in a way similar to the rise of Hitler in Germany during the 1930s. So someone was upset and said I told a lie on Baraka, but it's not true. The fact is that there are many people during this period of 2008 who were looking to Cynthia McKinney candidacy with the Green Party, and some people were inclined to vote for McKinney as opposed to the Democratic Party candidate. And McCain was the Republican Party candidate, and Amiri Baraka was among them, not the only one. There's some who also call themselves Black nationalists and communists, Black communists, who then also were characterizing a vote for McKinney as opposed to the Democratic Party candidate as contributing to the emergence of fascism through the election of McCain. So we say that this is, first of all, many Africans have recognized over the years that what happened to European Jews at the hands of Nazi Germany follows on the heels of an accepted, normalized practice against Africans, indigenous, Arab, and Asian people for hundreds of years by Europeans in the process of imposing slavery and colonialism on the majority of humanity, the process of building parasitic capitalism. The tendency to compare our situation with fascism in Nazi Germany and elsewhere is erroneous and outrageous when considering the murder, terror, torture, and exploitation that Africans have endured at the hands of our white so-called democratic colonizers for the past 600 years. It is worth noting that with all the terror and brutality Africans have faced since the introduction to European democracy, it took the emergence of Mussolini and Hitler and the attacks on the rights of white people for a special designation called fascism to suddenly become necessary. Aimé Césaire, the African leader based in Martinique and mentor to Frantz Fanon, wrote in 1955, check this out, this is 1955, he wrote this, quote, "First, we must study how colonization works to decivilize the colonizer, to brutalize him in the true sense of the word, to degrade him, to awaken him to buried instincts, to covetousness, violence, race hatred, and moral relativism. And we must show that each time a head is cut off or an eye put out in Vietnam and in France, they accept the fact. Each time a little girl is raped, and in France, they accept the fact. Each time a Madagascan is tortured, and in France, they accept the fact. Civilization acquires another dead weight. A universal regression takes place. A gangrene sets in. A center of infection begins to spread. And that at the end of all these treaties that have been violated, all these lies that have been propagated, all these punitive expeditions that have been tolerated, all these prisoners who have been tied up and interrogated, all these patriots who have been tortured, at the end of all the racial pride that has been encouraged, all the boastfulness that has been displayed, a poison has been instilled into the veins of Europe. And slowly but surely, the continent proceeds towards savagery. And then one fine day, the bourgeoisie is awakened by a terrific boomerang effect. The Gestapo are busy. The prisons fill up. The torturers around the racks invent, refine, discuss. People are surprised. They become indignant. They say, how strange. But never mind, it's Nazism. It will pass. And they wait and they hope and they hide the truth from themselves, that it is barbarism, the supreme barbarism, the crowning barbarism that sums up all the daily barbarism. It is Nazism, yes, but that before they were its victims, they were accomplices, that they tolerated that Nazism before it was inflicted on them, that they absorbed it, shut their eyes to it, legitimized it, because until then it had been applied only to non-European peoples, that they have cultivated that Nazism, that they are responsible for it, and that before engulfing the whole edifice of Western Christian civilization in its reddened waters, it oozes, seeps, and trickles from every crack. Yes, it would be worthwhile to study clinically in detail the steps taken by Hitler and Hitlerism and to reveal to the very distinguished, very humanistic, very Christian bourgeois of the 20th century that without its being aware of it, he has a Hitler inside him, that Hitler inhabits him, that Hitler is his demon, that if he rails against him, he is being inconsistent, and that at bottom, what he cannot forgive Hitler for is not the crime in itself, the crime against man. It is not the humiliation of man as such. It is the crime against the white man, the humiliation of the white man, and the fact that he applied a Europe colonialist procedure, which until then had been reserved exclusively for the Arabs of Algeria, the coolies of India, and the niggers of Africa, unquote. So when proto-fascist repression did appear in the United States in the 1950s, in what is called the McCarthy era, with a reign of terror backed by popular support from the general white population, chasing the Communist Party underground and almost into extinction, it was the colonized African population whose struggle for democracy kept the society open. Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Rosa Parks, and an army of Africans living near starvation and suffering every imaginable deprivation were the forces that not only defeated US fascism, but forged new definitions of democracy onto the agenda of the US. Africans would still be on plantations buck dancing for a slimy, non-fascist, democratic, white nationalist social system. And every white person who so demanded had those aforementioned Africans tremble from the fear of fascism. The designer character of the term is even more obvious when we search for a definition of fascism. While there are many, including some identified as scientific or Marxist, it is clear that there is not a satisfactory a priori definition. Fascism has become a pejorative, something that defines some traits of the phenomenon once it appears. But fascism is incapable of being defined scientifically in a way that would help us to know it before it arrives. It is notable that the ubiquitous murder, imprisonment, and police containment of the African population is never defined as fascist. These conditions are seen by the white population as normal. In fact, by so-called Black leftists, it's normal. You get to talk about fascism when something is happening or may happen that will impact on the general population, not what is happening to African people ourselves. It is only when the features of normal existence of the colonized begin to intrude into the existence of whites or the larger society, in quotes, the term fascism comes into play. At that point, the colonized are called on to choose between fascist colonialism and the non-fascist democratic colonialism. Amilcar Cabral, the leader of the revolutionary movement to defeat Portuguese colonialism in Guinea-Bissau, West Africa, he responded to Portuguese leftists who in Portugal, who were supposedly friends of the African Revolution, who declared that the defeat of fascism in Portugal would result in the end of Portuguese colonialism. And that meant that what they wanted, of course, was all resources to go to the efforts by these Portuguese to defeat capitalism, or to take the pressure off the white people in Portugal. And so this is what Cabral said in response to them 140. He says, we must reaffirm clearly that while being opposed to all fascism, our people are not fighting Portuguese fascism. We're fighting Portuguese colonialism. The destruction of fascism in Portugal must be the work of the Portuguese people themselves. The destruction of Portuguese colonialism will be the work of our people. While the fall of fascism in Portugal might not lead to the end of Portuguese colonialism, and this hypothesis has been put forward by some Portuguese opposition leaders, we are certain that the elimination of Portuguese colonialism will bring about the destruction of Portuguese fascism. Of course, that's the way it happened in the real world. Through our liberation struggle, we are making an effective contribution toward the defeat of Portuguese fascism and giving the Portuguese people the best possible proof of our solidarity. This factor is a cause of pride to our people who hope for the same solidarity from the Portuguese people. He's telling the Portuguese people that we are in solidarity in the struggle against fascism when we fight against colonialism. And we are proud of that contribution. And we want the same contribution coming from the white people in Portugal, fight against colonialism. Like Africans in what was then Portuguese Africa, Africans in the US and around the world are also fighting against colonialism. This is something that Baraka and the anti-fascist alarmists have not understood. The concern expressed about fascism is one that would keep the struggle for our liberation locked into a fight against fascism by supporting one or another of the non-fascist ruling class parties or personalities. The fight against fascism is a fight to maintain the capitalist imperialist status quo. It's not to get rid of the capitalist imperialist system, it's to maintain the status quo so it doesn't become repressive for the generalized colonizer population as it is to most of us all the time. Our party must deepen the crisis of imperialism, and that's generally what's being called for when it's called a fight against fascism, that somehow we are supposed to solve the problem of capital, solve the problem of the imperialists by fighting against this manifestation of imperialism, this form of the state, of the colonial state. Our party, the Advanced Detachment of the African working class, the Vanguard of the African Revolution, is unimpressed by the bleedings of the Democratic and Republican parties and the liberals of all nationalities hiding in their shadows. Both bourgeois parties had already fallen into such disrepute that Trump was not an illogical choice for white people to elect. Not to mention that among the Democrats, the contending outsider, Bernard Sanders, presented the greatest challenge to the party's anointed establishment leader, Hillary Rodham Clinton. The majority of the people in the US are not members of our African People's Socialist Party or the Uhuru movement. In fact, the majority does not know of our existence. But the greatest chance of the people knowing who we are and why they should stand with us is our willingness to take advantage of the disarray among the leading institutions of the colonized white ruling class. We must draw the line by taking clear, non-opportunist African internationalist positions that expose the system and show the way forward in an unambiguous way. While some liberals are protesting his castigation of the secret political police organizations and the bourgeois colonial media, Trump's revelations are useful in exposing the rot of this social system born of slavery, colonialism, and genocide. All the peoples of the US and the world are thirsty for real leadership to show the way forward out of the morass of bourgeois lies and deception that pushed them to Trump and the white nationalist Democratic Party left in the first place. Trump makes daily open attacks on the so-called deep state. The term deep state refers to the permanent hidden bodies of ruling class decision makers whose long-term plans are unaffected by changing administration. Through use of this term, Trump has introduced the question of the state to the millions of people worldwide who never knew of his presence by name. This has forced outright denial of the existence of the deep state by paid experts of ruling class media outlets and the new Central Intelligence Agency head during his Senate confirmation hearing. Our party's exposure of the role of elections to provide a means of nonviolent struggle for control of the state by contending sectors of the ruling class will now fall on better informed ears. The point is, comrades, we must move forward with our criticism of colonial capitalism without cessation. The white ruling class inadvertently continues to assist our exposure of the true nature of parasitic capitalism and the colonial domination of African people within the US and abroad. We must contribute to building the capacity of our people to resist. Indeed, these are dangerous times. They are dangerous because of the depth of the crisis of imperialism. As always, our party, the Advanced Detachment, will not join the herd in fighting to protect the system by struggling against fascism or racism. History has taught us that the biggest guarantee we have for any kind of democratic opening is to be found through struggle to limit the influence of the colonial capitalist state in the affairs of our people, political and economic power in the hands of the African working class. For the colonized people, this is a measure of democracy, which takes us to this whole question that we've raised about how this spontaneous uprisings of the people are being defined as something like characterized as Black Lives Matter. It doesn't inform the struggle. It doesn't help to take the people anywhere, which is why we are fighting upstream against that designation, which is why we engage in struggles even with people who are groups who are supposed to be our friends, in terms of how we have to define this contradiction, with the objective being to destroy the power of the imperialist state, of the colonial capitalist state. And the colonial capitalist state is Vanguard, domestically is the police department. And that, which is nothing but and for the colonized people, is nothing but a military occupation of our communities. That's made even clearer by the Trump administration actually sending in feds. And this is not the first time they send in federal troops. They send in federal troops. They brought back the 81st Airborne out of Vietnam to fight against us, to try and crush our movements in Detroit. And I think they did a similar thing in Newark, New Jersey. So the state is a military occupying force, and that we have to identify, we have to at least come up with a demand that African people ourselves have to have control of the state power. And part of that is to make an advance to push out the occupying military forces called the police. They must be removed from our communities. And we start that by demanding Black community control of the police. So that's part of why we engage in that struggle, not because we don't like the people who said the simple slogan of Black Lives Matter, is because it disinforms. It disinforms people, it disinforms struggle. It doesn't help us to move toward the actual continuation of the disintegration of the power of the colonial bourgeoisie and capitalist class. So we say our power is in the masses of African workers, in the heart of the colonists throughout the US and the world. We must build here, among the unorganized and barely organized masses of African workers, who under the leadership of our party will set the terms for a revolutionary response by the entire African nation that will bring the crisis of imperialism to a head, to a revolutionary conclusion. And this is important, because this is what I'm saying, that Comrades should not get too upset about the posers, about the ones who will take a line or take a phrase or take a particular characterization that we advance and we'll revise it to try to actually work against the revolution and go forward. Because as we said here, this is who we are. We say we must build here. They say our power is in the masses of African workers. It's not going to be in the number of likes we get on social media or anything like concretely. Our power is in the masses of African workers. It's in the Black Power Blueprint project that we have that's winning whole communities to solidarity and support with the party. It's in virtually everything that we're doing like this all around the world. It's in the heart of the colonists throughout the US and the world. We must build here among the unorganized and barely organized masses of African workers who, under the leadership of our party, will set the terms for a revolutionary response by the entire African nation that will bring the crisis of imperialism to a head, to a revolutionary conclusion. In the African colonies, the message of our party about the rigged elections will have a more receptive audience than ever. The FBI program targeting so-called Black identity extremists is further evidence that the US counterinsurgency carried out by intelligence agency, also known as the so-called deep state, exposed by the intra-capitalist struggle surrounding the Trump presidency. The high public disregard for the foul, garbage spewing media outlets of the colonized bourgeoisie gives us the opportunity to elevate and expand the influence of the party's media outlets. And this is increasingly meaning not just the bourgeois newspapers, not just the bourgeois television and radio, but also the bourgeois-controlled social media, like this one, which from time to time will actually shut it down and will actually tell people, don't believe anything that you hear here. We're going to tell you what you should believe, that kind of thing. The future of our people can only be guaranteed by the success of our party and leading our colonized nation throughout the world in an organized struggle to deepen the crisis of imperialism. We do this concretely by constructing a real capacity among the people to wage an unrelenting, unwavering fight against colonialism. We build a popular resistance and hatred of alien and foreign domination, a resistance to colonialism. We build the institutions of dual power that our party has been constructing for nearly 2 generations. We create the ideological, political, and territorial spaces for the masses to join in the building of dual power, even without the direct intervention of our party. Comrades, sisters, and brothers, our party has been waging this struggle against colonial capitalism for almost 50 years now. We are the only organization that has fought consistently to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s. We do this not as an abstract project based on a collection of position papers presenting 1,000 different political trends or tendencies. We are part of the historical continuum that has been busy solving the problems of a revolution, from which theory was developed and confirmed through practice. You can tell the effectiveness of African internationalism by the accomplishments of our party. It is our practical experience in advancing our struggle among the African working class that enables us to go into the trenches in the fight against the Trump regime, the latest manifestation of colonial world power. Comrades, sisters, and brothers, the new world we are fighting for is possible within our lifetime. It is up to us, Africans and other oppressed and colonized peoples of the world, to achieve the political clarity and organizational capacity to provide the revolutionary leadership required by colonized nations and workers to overturn this system in critical flux. We must bring about the new world without oppressors and the oppressed, exploiters and exploited, a world in which African workers have power over our lives and future. Our 7th Congress is a contribution the African People's Socialist Party is making to this end. And you, comrades, especially those of you of the party and those of you who are receptive to African internationalist theory and analysis, are fundamental to the victory that we are fighting for. We are opposed to opportunism, which is the next great battle we are going to be engaged in, especially when the people are in motion, because there are those who will try to derail a struggle to what end? A struggle for the absolute total liberation and unification of our Africa. That attempt will be made by opportunists on every continent that we are looking at, not only in Africa and the African world, but outside the African world. Because every one of them, the leaders of this opportunism recognizes that the whole of imperialism, the whole world system, the existing world order rests upon a foundation of African slavery and colonialism, and the colonialism, the colonization of the vast peoples around the world. So this is what we engage in now. That's why you, comrades, are so important to what it is that we do. That's why your dedication, your ability to really internalize the significance of African internationalism, the discipline necessary to win this revolutionary struggle, the ability to take the struggle out among masses of the people, becoming cadre, which means that you're not just the people who are absorbing information, but who are learning how and engaged in practice to provide leadership to masses of the people. This is where we are. And so we're saying that there is an extreme existential crisis that the entire imperialist system is experiencing, and it's our responsibility to deepen that crisis so that Africa and African people and the peoples of the world can be free of this plague that has infested the planet since the advent of colonial capitalism, coming as a consequence of the enslavement and dispersal of African people throughout the world. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, what a powerful, incredible study this has been. I just really want to appreciate you for that. And, there are lots of people tuning in, and I just want to just remind people that this is the time now for questions. That if you have any questions right now, type them into the chat so that the chairman can deal with them live. I want to acknowledge where some people are watching from. We have St. Petersburg, Florida, Chicago, Illinois, occupied Tanzania or South Africa, Spokane, Washington, Philly, Pennsylvania, St. Louis, Missouri, Palm Bay, Florida, Huntsville, Alabama, Frankfurt, Germany, Limpopo, South Africa, Nairobi, Kenya, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Georgia, Mokopane, South Africa, Hempstead, New York, Pinellas Park, Florida, Kampala, Uganda, Houston, Texas, Tampa, Florida, Mobile, Alabama, Bermuda, Melbourne, Australia, Sacramento, California, Brooklyn, New York, Greenville, South Carolina, Kuwait, Nairobi, I already mentioned Nairobi, Kenya, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Mississippi, Newark, New Jersey, Fort Myers, Florida, and San Francisco, California. So, Uhuru to everyone who is tuning in with us everywhere around the world. This study is important to every single one of us, no matter where it is that we are placed, because the crisis of imperialism is something that is being affected by Africans everywhere we've been dispersed. So I just really want to salute everyone and where you're watching from. San Diego, Winter Park, Florida, and Sierra Leone are some cities that were just added to that list. So, Uhuru, comrades. So there was a question that came earlier from it was on YouTube, this is from Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People Solidarity Committee. Asked, Uhuru Chairman, was the fight in Portland a white attempt to raise fascism by diverting from the anti-colonial resistance led by African workers?
That's in some ways what it's coming to be characterized as, which is a really important question, because some people have been thrown into a state of consternation because they've commented on how so many white people are seen in the demonstrations that are happening subsequent to the murder of George Floyd. And of course, what that means is that many people in the United States are experiencing various kinds of contradictions with the social system. That's something we've never denied and we should recognize. And we want as many forces as possible to struggle against the system. But when we're talking about what has happened, as what always happens, is the struggle of African people at the base, the fundamental critical question and issue of colonialism that thrusts all these forces into motion. And African people and the white people are not necessarily fighting for the same thing unless the white people unite under the leadership of Africans to fight against colonialism. Because every contradiction that we're looking at, whether it's the oppression of women, LGBT, whether it's all of this other stuff, it has its foundation in the colonial slavery of Africans, indigenous, and other peoples here and around the world. So that's what has to happen. Otherwise, what we see is self-serving activity. Like there's this saw like happening in Portland. I think is this iconic picture now of a naked white woman sitting in the middle of a street facing all kinds of domestic military forces, sitting there naked with her legs open and up, and this has become an iconic picture. And so now the question is how the government is initiating fascist activity against people's right to protest, but nothing is saying about overturning the colonialism that is the basis for the protest in the first place, which is what happened to African people. We saw something like this in the 60s, the so-called free speech movement that happened in Berkeley, California, University. And some people have forgotten about this, or when people hear about it, they've forgotten its origin. And the free speech movement happened on that campus in Berkeley because some students set up some tables in the common area of Berkeley that was supposedly supporting Congress of Racial Equality and other work that was being done in Mississippi by the Black movement. And the school made them move that down. And so the question of free speech now becomes a critical question of free speech of white students, not the struggle and oppression of African people. And so they stood up. Mario Savio was the name that became iconically connected to this whole thing. And so they stand up on top of cars and say MF and all this kind of stuff, and the right to say this, that was something that took the place of solidarity with the struggle of African people. So that's what we're saying. And so yeah, they can go to this fascist route about white people's ability to do this and say this and act a certain way and it becomes something that obscures the struggle against colonialism. They should unite under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru movement, and demand death to colonialism. Overturn colonialism and you overturn every fundamental contradiction that exists here and around the world. Uhuru. That's what Comrade Chairwoman Penny Hess is about, by the way, and the African People's Solidarity Committee under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, the international party, Uhuru.
Uhuru, yes. Next question comes from.
Let me say, it's important. This is not some subjective ranting. This is not some the white man is the devil kind of stuff, because I'm not religious and we're not a religious organization. But it is something that says that if you want to end this oppression, if you really truly want to end what's happening, if you really truly want liberation, we're showing you the direction of get that. We're showing you the foundation, the root of every contradiction that exists in the capitalist social system. Every contradiction, it revolves around the relationship between oppressed and oppressor nations and the oppressed peoples, and African in particular. The whole social system rests upon a foundation of slavery and colonialism, the attack on Africa, and the dispersal of the African nation. That's what African internationalism teaches us, and that's what makes sense. And even all of those people who are out there naked with their legs open to, I don't know for what, facing this potential military assault, they know it too when they hear Uhuru. Sorry.
Uhuru, no, you're fine, Chairman. We had a question from on YouTube from the Black Internationalist. Says, Chairman, is China imperialist?
I don't know if you can call China imperialist. I think the real question that people are struggling with right now is Chinese intervention, particularly in Africa, but various other places around the world. And I think what we see with China is having broken free, more or less, of as a semi-colony of European white power. Even the struggle is even happening now. You look at what's the noise being made around Hong Kong, held as a British colony, even after independence of China in 1949, held up until recently. And this is part of the whole thing about maintaining a control of foothold. Look at what, so China, I think, has developed a plan, a scheme to move its agenda forward within the context of an existing world economy, world capitalist economy. And China has a plan for its own economic development, to grow its own political influence that respond to its economic aspirations and existence. And in the process of doing that, contending with the United States and so-called Western imperial powers. That's what China is doing. And what China is doing is what all the others are doing in terms of recognizing that the critical mineral resources for any emerging society, any effective technological society, those resources are in Africa. And what China is doing is dealing with an Africa that has been balkanized, split up, and is under colonial domination. Got neo-colonial puppets in every instance, more or less, who serve, whose purpose mainly is to shovel out the resources of Africa to all these other entities, which is the reason why the African People's Socialist Party or the African Socialist International exists, because we have to organize to give Africa itself, not these 54 or 55 different enclaves that call themselves countries and nations, but Africa itself must have a single voice, which is what Garvey was trying to create, and which is what the African Socialist International or the International African People's Socialist Party is about. We're going to have to make revolution, and we're going to have to advance the struggle of Africa to tear down those borders, to remove the neo-colonial puppet regimes that control Africa, and so that Africa can have its own voice, can project its own interests from against China or anybody else. So that's what I would say. So I don't say China is an imperialist country, except de facto, it takes advantage of what the imperialists have created in Africa, and it takes advantage of the incoherence of any kind of Africa policy coming from Africa, with the exception of what it is that we're doing with the African Socialist International, the African People's Socialist Party. Uhuru. I hope that was helpful. somewhat, anyway.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. We have a question from the sister in Frankfurt, Germany, and it's, I'm gonna, do my best to try to, well, okay, so it says their question is the connections, I guess they mean the connections between the US and Europe in terms of what they characterize as the global racist, Zionist, and fascist. That's what they say, the global racist, Zionist, and fascist connections taking place in Europe. Does that sound like?
Ich verstehe nicht, aber versuchen. I don't understand exactly what is meant here, but I will say that the entire world economy, which which has its origin with this European phenomenon of going out and capturing all the resources and creating economic and political structures, they're tied together. And that dominates the world. And Israel is simply a military outpost of US imperialism specifically, but it serves all of the white imperialist interests there in controlling resources, in the intent to control political and economic resources in what is called the Middle East. And also it acts as an anchor, as a southern anchor for the domination of Africa as a military threat. And it's always intervening in Africa, as most people know. Again, we see a whole economic system is experiencing tremendous stress now because of the struggles of the oppressed peoples of the world, and that the problem is that we have to become organized and we have to become clear politically and ideologically in what it's going to take for us to win. So the Zionist phenomenon is simply a part of the imperialist phenomenon, and it has strategic significance to the ongoing domination of the world by Europe, and with currently the US at its head of this project. But there are splits happening in Europe as well, even as we have this discussion, and some of them are very obvious and some are not. The splits are happening because they are all competing for shrinking resources that's accessible, available to them. I mean, you look at the situation, that's how we talk about Brexit, we're talking about how the so-called Eurocentric rise of Eurocentric forces in Italy. We talk about how even Spain is experiencing a certain kind of quandary about splitting, but sectors trying to split off, and how the Trump is dealing with the trade relations or trying to, that came out of of this whole Atlantic Charter thing, Atlanticist club. So there's contradictions among them. I think we have to really recognize that. So even while there is a obvious unity among the imperialists in terms of the continuing domination of Africa and the rest of us, there are splits and contradictions among them that we must be aware of and prepared to take advantage of. So Israel, I mean, is an illegitimate white nationalist settler state. It was created by white people. They resurrected a dead language and put it there, and to give these white people some kind of a designation, claiming God gave this place to them a couple of thousand years ago, which is ridiculous. I don't even know other countries where you can send in some white people. Well, yes, of course, almost every country where the white people are settlers, God sent them there. You know what I mean? Sent them to slavery, sent them to this land that in the United States. That's what settlerism is. And I'm glad you pushed me to say it. United States is a settler country as well. It's a settler state, just like Israel and some of these other things that we're talking about.
Uhuru. Yes, thank you so much, Chairman. That was brilliant. Next question. This is more of a comment from Lorraine on YouTube. Says, I live in Marion. Marion, it doesn't say the state. But it says Black Lives Matter has opened a chapter here in the city. In my opinion, unless they partner with you, their efforts are fruitless. And they also ask, are the European countries planning or considering nuclear attacks in Africa?
Well, first of all, let me say this, that the issue is not these courageous, many of them courageous individuals who fight under the banner of Black Lives Matter. It's a brand more than anything else. If I understand, there are only something like 14 so-called Black Lives Matter chapters, and they are generally small entities. So these thousands and perhaps more than 1 million people who've been out in the streets saying Black Lives Matter, they are just people who CNN and all these other outlets have introduced to this as the brand, Black Lives Matter. So you go out and you say Black Lives Matter because that's what's been said. And so I think that the majority of Africans who hear us will unite with this, and not the leaders, not those who are on the payroll. And I mean this actually, I mean this in reality. I'm talking about, I think I've read something like $100 million from Soros and Ford and other things, at least that and more, given to this Black Lives Matter entity. And because it's handy, when you got the Democratic Party, or you got the which is the House of the Republic of the Congress, can put on their kente cloth and get on one knee and say Black Lives Matter, and the mayor of Washington, D.C., with some of the most repressive police organizations and gentrification policies in this country, can put on the sidewalks and stuff like that, Black Lives Matter. It is simply something that is diversionary, and it keeps Africans from coming to the best conclusion. So I just want to say that the people have picked up on a brand. And I think what your responsibility is, comrade, is to say Black Power Matter, is to say Black community control of the police, because that's a statement of the need for African people to acquire state power and to come out against colonialism, because colonialism is the material manifestation that people can put their hands on, and you know how to overturn that, as opposed to this assumption of fighting against racism. We did that stuff, 50 years or more ago. The anti-racist civil rights movement happened. And a problem with that is that we had advanced much further than that when the United States government decided it had to kill and destroy and arrest people who were fighting for fundamental transformation of our relationship with imperial white power. So we have been there, done that, and had advanced beyond that. And now this is an attempt to push the movement back so that you talk about race, which is an artificial construct any damn way. And you talk about Black Lives Matter, which doesn't mean anything, because even Trump, before he dies, will probably say Black Lives Matter, and it won't mean anything. And if he has to say it to get elected, he'll say Black Lives Matter. Except the problem is for Trump is that he's going to lose a lot of the white support, because Black Lives Matter means something to them that has more meaning ideologically than it does in actual practice. Just like Barack Hussein Obama, who was really an abomination in terms of the struggle of African oppressed peoples around the world. So you had white people masses of white people who did not understand how clever the bourgeoisie had been in putting Obama in place, and who were so wedded ideologically to an anti-Black, anti-African appearance that they came out with guns at his appearances and things like that. And African people who were so beaten down and accustomed to being trounced and talked badly about, et cetera, and who have this incipient nationalist character, stood up because they saw in Obama, they were able to see themselves. And the only reason they could see themselves in Obama was because he was relatively dark-skinned, and he could play basketball, and he could imitate Al Green. Nothing else happened in the world that should have made them see themselves in Obama. Somehow, I think I've strayed from where the comrade was going with that question. But anyway, Uhuru.
Uhuru. And they had raised the question about nuclear. Oh
yeah, I don't. The issue of nuclear confrontation. It's relatively complicated, and by which I mean that neither of the real nuclear powers, and I'm not necessarily including Israel in this, or India or Pakistan, not necessarily, except as they play roles in service to US imperialism. The exception of Israel is a case where the tail can wag the dog because it has such strategic significance to the US that it can get away with stuff that some of the other minions cannot get away with. But the thing that makes it complicated is that the powers, the real nuclear powers, cannot easily confront each other militarily. Because to confront each other directly militarily puts into place the possibility of nuclear conflagration. And neither of them want that, not that. The biggest problem that we have is that, and Israel, in order to, because Israel has been really struggling to push the United States into an attack on Iran, and has committed all kinds of provocative acts in that region, not only in Iran, but Lebanon and other places, Syria, provocative attacks, and to the point that they have almost initiated an attack on Russian troops who were in Syria supporting the regime of Bashar al-Assad. The possibility of some kind of confrontation, sometimes even accidental, that would push them into that with so much posturing going on in the South China Sea, going on with the U.S. Faking attacks on the Russian border, air attacks on the Russian border. With this kind of stuff going on, the possibility of a mistake, because I don't think either of them want that attack. The other thing that's about Africa, however, that is another question. And I think that they're capable of doing that, but it's not likely. Not because of a love for Africa, or not even because Africa has the power to push them out. The AFRICOM, which is the military presence, formalized and consolidated as a strategic force in Africa, is put on the ground there to protect what the US sees as its interest from China, from any other force in the world, and from Africans ourselves. So this would be the basis of some kind of conflagration. Most of the struggle in Africa over the recent period have been proxy wars. What you've seen in Congo, for example, proxy wars to control the cobalt and the coltan and other rich minerals there. The US, France, and other forces fighting these wars against proxies. And that is to say, Africa's on the ground, are funded in certain ways, directed to certain activities, and a market is created for them to move what they've characterized as, I've forgotten, what do they call, blood diamonds and other kinds of raw materials. There's a whole market that's being created. So, and that's just one example. There are other resources that happen, get taken to. Coups, all this stuff is the means by which these battles are being fought. So I don't think it's likely at this point. I don't think the crisis has developed to such a point where that is likely to occur. And it's not because of love of Africa, but it's because of love of Africa's resources, and also because of what the countries that would initiate that would have to do with each other, because these are proxy wars that we see happening in Africa. So China, for example, has established a military base in Djibouti, but so is the US, and so other imperialist forces in Djibouti, as well, that function sort of like as a what do you call it? A sort of what do you call these big ships that the airplanes, anyway, that's what Djibouti has become, like this station for military forces from these different countries. And so it just doesn't seem that likely to happen, if only because it could mean a confrontation between these imperial forces, and that could result in a nuclear war. I mean, if you look nuclear confrontation, look at what's just happening between China and India. Look at what happens between India and Pakistan. All of these are nuclear forces, and they engage sometimes in military confrontation with each other on the ground. So I don't think that that's in the something that you can anticipate in the near future in China. I mean, in Africa. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairman. And we'll take one more question before we have to close out. And I think this could take up that time. This comes from Comrade Tachara Masimba in St. Louis. Asked, Chairman, can you talk about the liberal imperialist tactic of creating the African petty bourgeoisie? And you were mentioning it just a moment ago. Right.
Well, first of all, I want to really express appreciation to Comrade Tachara Masimba. Some people may not know him, but he's well known within our movement, and he's well known in North St. Louis, where he's responsible for leading this incredible Black Power Blueprint project process that's on the ground in St. Louis. And what has occurred is some of it is intentional. I think that the imperialist forces have had to conclude that it's absolutely necessary to use Africans to administer their interests. I think this is something that was really sharpened and sparked by the Kenyan Land Freedom Army, who fought the so-called Mau Mau, who fought the British to stand still for many, many years in Kenya before British brutality against the population. Talking about, they want to call it fascism. I mean, the stuff that the British did to African people in Kenya, the horrible, grotesque wars that was part of the whole process of really developing counterinsurgency tactics up until that point. I think that the British took the lead. And one of the authors of this process was this man, Frederick Lugard, in Indirect Rule, and where they actually would bring in a sector of the African population to function as managers of their resources in Africa and other places, and the whole neo-colonial setup. And the Africans have a real struggle. This is one of the weakness of our movement right now, real struggle in recognizing the existence of class-defined issues. And what they did, what the imperialists have done, is give a sector, a tiny sector of the African population, an actual material interest in maintaining the status quo, so that they, their families, et cetera, benefit from it. And people who, and circles around them. So a certain class of forces has been created and emerged to carry out the interests of the bourgeoisie. And that happens in Africa. That happens in the United States as well. It happens everywhere you locate it. I've seen it in England. I've seen it in France and Germany and other places. Wherever we are, we function, no matter how militantly we do so, we function as managers. And sometimes if we don't control actual territories, we function as ideological transmission belts from the bourgeoisie, from the colonial capitalist bourgeoisie to the masses of our people. So that is real, and that exists, it continues to exist, and that's part of the struggle we're involved in right now. And practically in the neo-colonial situation, where neocolonialism really is one of the highest expression of opportunism that you can find, where you take a sector of the African population, will sacrifice the long-term interests of Africa and African people, of the African working class, of the African poor peasantry, for some benefit for this narrow class of folk that have been created and defined and sustained by its relationship to imperialism. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, I just really, again, want to appreciate you for this really incredible study. And there are so many more questions I wish we could get to, including one that just came from the best blind DJ, DJ Eddie.
Let's hear from DJ Eddie. Let's hear what the best blind DJ.
Well, he says, he asked, well, one, he said, welcome back to the FM. And for people who didn't know, the station had some programming. Well, we had to shut down our station because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but We're back now, so Omali Tommy is back on the air. And so you were saying, welcome back, we've missed you. And he said, I'll just ask one of the questions. He says, when do you think we will come together as one?
I think we are together as one. We really are. And we see expressions of that all the time in terms of how even a spontaneous movement toward oneness that Africans find ourselves engaging in when we know that we're in trouble in any place in the world. You know, we experience a real sense of sympathy and empathy. There's a sense of sameness that exists among us, even though it's not that well defined. And the problem is that the leadership has to be in place in order to allow that that oneness to be able to express itself organizationally and politically and ideologically. And that's what the work of the party is about. That's what Black Power 96, I think, helps to do, even though, you know, it's not a party entity as such, but I think it functions to help get information out that would contribute to a sense of oneness among African people, a sense of sameness. That's part of the process. And that's why everybody all over the African world loves the best blind DJ in the world, Comrade Eddie Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, DJ Eddie, and just everyone for tuning in. Want to appreciate you and just say that because of time, we want everyone to know that if your question wasn't answered, one of our moderators will correspond with you and make sure that the chairman sees your question. This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For your worldwide revolutionary news and analysis, visit theburningspear.com. And join us for the entire month as we celebrate Black August, a month of African resistance. During Black August, the Burning Spear newspaper conducts an annual fundraiser to keep the spear burning. The revolutionary Black Power print and online journal in constant production since 1968, founded by our very own Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Help us reach our fundraising goal by donating at theburningspear.com/Black August. Contribute to the Mafundi Lake sponsor of Prisoner Fund, where we ship to over 500 prisoners for free. Participate in our August Spear Sales competition and win some one-of-a-kind collector's items. And tune in August 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern for a virtual culture event, Africa Speaks for Itself, a night of poetry and storytelling with African cultural workers across the world, celebrating 100 years since the adoption of the red, black, and green flag to represent the African nation by Marcus Garvey's presented before us by Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. Revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world. Tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. It's where you can hear the best blind DJ, DJ Eddie. Did you unite with what you heard today and want to learn more about how you can get involved with the African People's Socialist Party? Visit apspuhuru.org for all information regarding how you can apply. No matter where it is you're located in the world, you can join the African People's Socialist Party. Order your copy of Chairman Omali Yeshitela's latest book, Vanguard, The Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, at burningspearmarketplace.com. That was the piece that we were reading from on today. So you can go again and get that at burningspearmarketplace.com. Coming up August 15th and 16th, the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations is virtually hosting their annual conference themed Fight for Black Power, Free All Political Prisoners. The Fight for Black Power requires the immediate release of all our political prisoners. You can register today at blackisbackcoalition.org. And we are calling on people to follow the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook, or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic. Uhuru Furniture Stores in Oakland and Philadelphia go live on Facebook every week to highlight beautiful new pieces and build African economic self-determination. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, tune in every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern at facebook.com/Uhuru Furniture Philly. And in Oakland, California, tune in every Wednesday and Saturday at 12 p.m. Pacific time at facebook.com/Uhuru Furniture Oak. Lastly, to keep up with our movement events, visit theburningspear.com's events page and subscribe to our mailing list. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru!